597,630 vehicles. That's how many General Motors trucks and SUVs are under an active recall in the United States alone. Another 721,000 around the world share the same mechanical DNA and the same potential for failure. By the time you finish reading this segment, statistics suggest another handful of engines will have suffered catastrophic internal breakdowns somewhere on America's highways. What began as a handful of consumer complaints has escalated into one of the largest mechanical crises in GM's modern history, exposing not only a production defect, but also the fragility of public trust in an era where information spreads faster than facts can be verified. This story isn't built on rumor. Over 28,000 official consumer complaints, more than 14,000 confirmed engine failures while driving, and over $300 million in warranty costs have already been logged in federal records. Yet the recall's headline numbers tell only part of the story. Beneath the surface lies a chain of manufacturing missteps, confused messaging, civil litigation, and online speculation that together form a cautionary tale for every modern automaker. This isn't the first time GM has faced mechanical controversy. The company's 2014 ignition switch scandal left deep scars, financially, legally, and culturally. But the current crisis surrounding the 6.2-litre L87 V8 engine is different. There are no congressional hearings, no executives in handcuffs, and so far, no criminal investigations. Instead, the fight is unfolding quietly inside dealerships, repair shops, and courtrooms across the country. In this 10-part report, we'll examine what actually went wrong, how it happened, and what it means for both GM and its customers. From the moment a family SUV lost power on a Minnesota freeway to the lawsuits now consolidating in Michigan federal court, this is the anatomy of a modern automotive failure, told through verified documents, technical evidence, and the human stories caught in between. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. On a cold morning outside Minneapolis, registered nurse Jennifer Caldwell, owner of a 2022 GMC Yukon Denali, merged onto Interstate 94 with her 2 children in the back seat. 47,000 miles on the odometer, all maintenance performed on schedule, 0 prior issues. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. A metallic rattle, like marbles in a blender. She later told investigators, erupted from under the hood. 3 seconds later, total power loss. The steering stiffened, the dashboard went black, and the 600-pound SUV drifted helplessly toward the shoulder as traffic roared past at 65 miles per hour. They were lucky to make it out unharmed. The tow truck driver, who arrived an hour later, offered an unsettling confession. Jennifer's Yukon was the 4th GM truck he had hauled that week, with an identical failure. Similar stories began flooding social media groups and NHTSA complaint boards throughout early 2025. Owners from Florida to Oregon reported engines seizing mid-drive, sometimes on brand new vehicles with less than 2,000 miles. Others described warning signs, tapping noises, flickering oil pressure lights, but most said the breakdowns came without notice. Each new post triggered a wave of panic among GM owners and renewed scrutiny from regulators. By late March 2025, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had documented more than 28,000 fuel and engine-related complaints tied to GM's 6.2-litre V8. Within weeks, the company initiated a limited internal review that quickly ballooned into a full recall. What investigators found inside the failed engines was alarming. Shredded bearings, fractured connecting rods, and crankshafts gouged by metallic debris. For customers like Jennifer, the aftermath was grueling. Dealerships faced parts shortages, pushing replacement wait times beyond 3 months. Loaner vehicles were scarce, forcing many families to rent cars at their own expense. GM's interim solution, switching to a heavier oil blend and monitoring the engines, struck many as dismissive. "They changed the oil and sent me home," Jennifer said, but nobody could explain why the first engine died. Her experience was far from isolated. Across the US, thousands of drivers were confronting the same silent failure, an issue not limited to one model or region. but woven through the very production lines that powered GM's flagship vehicles. And as these stories multiplied, the question turned from what failed to why it happened at all. The LE 87 V8 isn't a fringe experiment. It's the beating heart of GM's most popular trucks and luxury SUVs, the Chevrolet Silverado 1500, GMC Sierra, Yukon, and the Cadillac Escalade. On paper, it's a robust, time-tested design, 6.2 liters of pushrod muscle refined over decades. Yet beneath that reliability image, engineers discovered two microscopic flaws that when combined became catastrophic. The first defect was contamination. During manufacturing between March 2021 and May 2024, metal shavings and machining debris accumulated inside critical oil passages and connecting rods. Imagine tiny metallic dust swirling through the lifeblood of an engine. Oil meant to lubricate and cool is instead carrying sandpaper. Over time, that debris eats away at bearing surfaces, grinding down components that depend on near-perfect smoothness to function. The second defect was dimensional. The crankshafts produced during this period were found to be out of specification. Their surfaces rougher than tolerances allowed, their bearings fitted with microscopic misalignments. That small error, often just a few microns, translates to stress concentrations that amplify under heat and pressure. When oil contamination meets improper clearances, failure is inevitable. The result? Bearings overheat, oil pressure collapses, and connecting rods break free, sometimes punching through the engine block itself. Unlike typical wear and tear failures that reveal warning signs, these breakdowns were sudden and unpredictable. But these warning signs, these breakdowns were sudden and unpredictable. Some engines seized within 1,200 miles, barely past the first oil change. Others lasted over 100,000 miles before imploding. No clear mileage pattern emerged, frustrating engineers and fueling speculation that a deeper systemic issue might be involved. GM engineers eventually isolated the problem to a small subset of manufacturing lines at 2 plants, yet by then, hundreds of thousands of vehicles were already in circulation. Internal memos, later cited in class action filings, described non-conforming debris contamination during assembly and inconsistent surface finish verification. Those phrases might sound technical, but they point to one conclusion: quality control slipped, and the consequences were nationwide. By early 2025, GM acknowledged the defects publicly, yet many owners still felt they weren't getting straight answers. As technical documents circulated online, a new wave of misinformation erupted, turning a serious mechanical problem into a breeding ground for viral conspiracies. When the recall news broke, YouTube channels, Facebook groups, and car forums exploded with speculation. Claims of FBI raids, executive arrests, and criminal cover-ups spread faster than official statements could counter them. Some posts even alleged that GM CEO Mary Barra had been indicted for fraud, an accusation that turned out to be completely fabricated. To verify the facts, reporters scoured federal databases, DOJ press releases, and congressional schedules. The result? No criminal investigations, no executive indictments, no hearings in Washington. The confusion, investigators believe, stemmed from memories of GM's 2014 ignition switch crisis, or when 124 fatalities prompted a $900 million federal settlement and public hearings. That scandal left a lingering expectation. If GM faced another high-profile failure, criminal charges must follow. But the L87 crisis didn't fit that narrative. What existed instead were civil class action lawsuits filed between February and July 2025, consolidated in Michigan's Eastern District. These cases focus on consumer compensation, extended warranties, reimbursements, and repair coverage, not criminal accountability. To the average car owner scrolling through social media, the distinction blurred. Civil lawsuit became criminal probe, and speculation filled the gaps where official communication lagged. Meanwhile, self-proclaimed insiders published leaked reports claiming the recall would balloon to 2.8 million vehicles. The verified figure, 597,630 units in the US, with roughly 721,000 globally, never changed. Yet once misinformation takes hold, corrections rarely catch up. The danger wasn't just reputational. Some GM owners, fearing collapse of resale value, sold their vehicles at steep losses. Others delayed recall appointments out of confusion, believing replacements were fake fixes. The same misinformation that claimed to expose the truth was now putting drivers at risk by dissuading them from repairs. In this environment, truth became fragmented. GM's quiet press releases were drowned out by louder, more sensational voices, and that information vacuum, ironically, became the scandal's second engine, fueled not by oil and metal, but by clicks and outrage. On April 26, 2025, GM formally filed recall documents with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The scale was massive, nearly 600,000 vehicles spanning model years 2021 through 2024, across Chevrolet, GMC, and Cadillac. But what the recall included and excluded immediately raised eyebrows. Covered models listed with the GMC Sierra 1500, Chevrolet Silverado 1500, GMC Yukon, Chevrolet Tahoe and Suburban, and Cadillac Escalade. Yet the 2019-2020 model years, which used the same L87 engine architecture, were omitted. GM claimed that data showed no elevated failure rate for those earlier runs. Plaintiffs in ongoing lawsuits disagreed, submitting owner testimonies describing identical failures from pre-2021 vehicles. Whether that exclusion was justified or strategic remains under litigation. GM also declared that 2025 models were unaffected, citing corrective machining and contamination prevention protocols implemented as of June 2024. But with few 2025 engines in long-term service yet, the claim remains untested. Owners began receiving recall letters in June 2025. The instructions seemed straightforward. Bring the vehicle to a certified dealer for inspection and potential remedy. But execution proved chaotic. Dealers struggled with staffing, replacement parts, and inconsistent communication. Wait times stretched from 6 weeks to more than 3 months for engines requiring full replacement. Frustrations grew when owners learned what the recall remedy actually entailed. Rather than large-scale replacements, 97% of affected vehicles were slated only for an oil change procedure, from 0W20 to thicker 0W40 oil, plus a new filter, cap and revised owner's manual. Those whose engines passed inspection would also receive a 10-year, 150,000-mile extended warranty, transferable to future owners. GM positioned the measure as a preventative safeguard, but critics, however, called it a band-aid on a bullet wound. They argued that if contamination was already inside the engines, changing oil viscosity couldn't eliminate the problem. Legal filings accused GM of shifting mechanical risk onto consumers. Online, the outrage intensified. Yet GM engineers maintained their stance. The thicker oil offered added bearing protection for engines that hadn't yet shown symptoms. It wasn't meant to fix damage, it was meant to prevent it from spreading. Whether that was genuine technical judgment or calculated cost saving became the next major debate. When GM's official remedy was finally revealed, an oil change and warranty extension, it ignited one of the fiercest consumer backlashes in recent automotive history. To most owners, the idea that a $70,000 truck's catastrophic failure could be prevented by thicker oil sounded absurd. GM insisted the science supported it. According to internal service bulletins distributed to dealerships in June 2025, revised 0W40 synthetic blend increases film strength between moving metal surfaces, improving protection for bearings under load. Engineers argued this adjustment could stabilize marginally contaminated engines, preventing further degradation. In theory, it made sense. In practice, it felt like a shortcut. For the 3% of vehicles that failed inspection, roughly 17,900 engines, the process was far more invasive. Those engines were replaced entirely with post-June 2024 builds manufactured under tighter quality controls. Yet that number was a fraction of the affected fleet, leaving hundreds of thousands of customers wondering whether they were driving time bombs. Compounding the frustration were cost implications. The new oil type was significantly pricier, averaging over $200 per service compared to $90 for standard oil changes. Over a decade of ownership, that difference could cost thousands. Fuel efficiency also declined by 35%, increasing long-term operating costs. One class action filing calculated that reduced mileage would cost each owner roughly $1,200 in extra fuel. The lawsuits argued that GM's preventive measure effectively transferred ongoing financial burden to customers while allowing the company to avoid large-scale replacements. GM countered that the extended warranty, covering 10 years or 150,000 miles with full parts and labor, more than compensated for any inconvenience. Still, confidence eroded. Reports surfaced of owners being denied reimbursement for out-of-warranty repairs on vehicles produced just weeks outside the recall window. Others alleged that replacement engines contained the same defective parts. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories deepened mistrust. In the public eye, GM's image shifted from reluctant problem solver to evasive corporation protecting profits. Even loyal customers, many of whom had driven GM vehicles for decades, voiced doubts. The company's technical defense, while plausible, couldn't overcome the perception that it was downplaying a deeper systemic issue. And as anger spread, the crisis stopped being purely mechanical. It became financial. By the second quarter of 2025, the financial consequences of GM's recall were undeniable. The company reported $300 million in additional warranty expenses, its second largest quarterly hit after tariff-related costs. For an automaker the size of GM, those numbers were manageable, but they still signaled a serious operational failure. Stock markets reacted swiftly. GM shares, trading at $53.32 in January 2025, slid to $46.50 by February as rumors circulated, then dropped again to $45.30 when the recall became official in April. That 15% decline erased nearly $9 billion in market value. The 16% decline erased nearly $9 billion in market value. Analysts questioned whether the company had been slow to respond or had underestimated the scale of the issue. The drop echoed through the automotive sector, affecting suppliers and dealerships reliant on GM sales momentum. Warranty reserves were expanded, logistics budgets tightened, and marketing initiatives delayed to offset recall costs. Yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. Recovery. By October 2025, GM stock had rebounded to $60.94, its highest in nearly 2 years. 4 major financial firms upgraded their outlooks, citing stabilized warranty exposure and sustained investor confidence. The market, it seemed, had forgiven faster than consumers. This recovery underscored an uncomfortable truth about modern corporations. Financial stability often returns long before public trust. GM's quarterly filings showed steady global revenue and no signs of liquidity distress. Credit agencies maintained investment-grade ratings, estimating a bankruptcy probability below 10%. The company's resilience reassured investors, but to affected owners still waiting for parts or refunds, it felt like a disconnect. Legal liabilities, however, remained uncertain. GM faced multiple class action suits seeking compensation for repair costs, fuel losses, and alleged concealment of defects. Based on past settlements, including a $150 million payout for earlier engine failures, analysts projected potential exposure of $2,000 to $12,000 per claimant. If courts ruled against GM, those proceedings were expected to take 3 to 5 years to resolve. Financially, GM could absorb the hit. Reputationally, the scars might last longer. Each headline about exploding engines or band-aid fixes chipped away at a century-old brand built on durability. But as the dust settled, one thing became clear: GM's ordeal was not unique. Across the industry, other automakers were facing similar demons. GM's crisis, though dramatic, wasn't an isolated failure. It was a symptom of an industry under immense pressure. The same forces reshaping the global car market, cost-cutting, globalization, and technological complexity, were quietly setting traps for other manufacturers. In 2022, Ford recalled over 520,000 vehicles for cracked fuel injectors in its 1.5-litre EcoBoost engines. The issue caused fuel leaks severe enough to start fires. 2 years later, another 90,000 Ford vehicles were pulled for intake valve fractures linked to supplier grinding errors, strikingly similar to GM's contamination problem. Ford's remedy: a 10-year, 150,000-mile extended warranty, the exact same approach now under scrutiny at GM. Stellantis, the parent company of Dodge and Ram, faced a backlash of its own in 2024, when it discontinued its iconic Hemi V8 engines amid quality control concerns. A 10-year, 150,000-mile extended warranty. The decision sparked massive customer anger and eventually forced a partial reinstatement after Ram CEO Tim Kuniskis came out of retirement to calm the storm. Even abroad, the pattern persisted. In May 2025, 4 Volkswagen executives were convicted in German court for their role in the Dieselgate emissions scandal, nearly a decade after it first erupted. 11 million vehicles had been affected worldwide. The case served as a reminder that corporate accountability, when it comes, often arrives years too late. What links all these cases isn't the specific defect, it's the ecosystem that breeds them. Modern engines are engineering marvels, built with tolerances so tight that even microscopic contamination can cause failure. Supply chains span continents, and a single flawed batch from a subcontractor can cripple production for years. As automakers race toward electrification and automation, traditional quality oversight is stretched thinner than ever. The combination of outsourced manufacturing, cost pressure, and compressed timelines has created a perfect storm for errors. What's more, regulators like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration typically act only after receiving consumer complaints, meaning systemic defects often go undetected until thousands of failures occur. GM's recall, then, isn't just a story about one company's misstep, it's a case study in how fragile the modern automotive ecosystem has become. And as the next sections reveal, the implications for consumers and regulators extend far beyond any single brand. For GM owners, the recall's impact went far beyond mechanical inconvenience. It rippled through daily life, finances, and trust in one of America's oldest automakers. What began as an engine problem became a customer relations crisis, defined by uncertainty, frustration, and mounting skepticism toward corporate promises. When recall letters began arriving in mailboxes in mid-2025, they offered a semblance of reassurance, inspection, oil change, and extended warranty coverage. But the reality was far more complicated. Dealerships, already overwhelmed by labor shortages, were buried under service appointments. Some owners waited months for diagnostic slots. Others reported being turned away because replacement engines were on national backorder. The Mobil 10W40 synthetic oil, central to GM's remedy, soon became its own supply bottleneck. Dealers across multiple states reported zero availability for weeks, leaving vehicles undrivable until oil shipments resumed. A few opportunistic service centers even began price gouging, charging inflated rates for priority oil changes. Financially, the recall eroded resale values almost overnight. Used vehicle marketplaces reflected sharp drops in listings for affected GM trucks and SUVs, with depreciation accelerating by as much as 15% in some regions. Dealers quietly admitted that many buyers simply refused to consider vehicles with the L87 V8, even with warranty coverage. For loyal GM customers, that sentiment was disheartening. The human side of the crisis became increasingly visible. Online owner forums evolved into support groups, part therapy, part legal coordination hub. Dozens of Facebook pages and Reddit threads documented experiences ranging from smooth repairs to prolonged standoffs with unresponsive dealerships. Class action attorneys scouted these spaces for potential plaintiffs, while frustrated owners traded advice on documenting repair histories, filing NTXA complaints, and navigating reimbursement claims. Meanwhile, opportunists exploited the confusion. Scammers began advertising recall priority services or engine replacement shortcuts on social media, tricking owners into paying for bogus repair scheduling. The Federal Trade Commission eventually issued a warning about fake recall websites impersonating GM service portals. In short, what should have been a structured recall campaign devolved into a fragmented consumer ordeal, one where frustration, misinformation, and logistical breakdowns fed each other in a vicious cycle. The cost wasn't just mechanical, it was emotional, and as the dust settled, the question many owners asked was no longer, will GM fix my engine, but can I ever trust them again? The L87 engine recall will be remembered not just for its scale, but for what it revealed about the modern auto industry's vulnerabilities. On the surface, it was a story of metal, oil, and bearings. Beneath it, however, lay deeper themes of corporate accountability, information reliability, and the delicate balance between innovation and quality control. General Motors survived the crisis financially. It absorbed $300 million in warranty expenses, settled lawsuits, and even regained investor confidence by the end of 2025. But reputation doesn't rebound as quickly as stock prices. Thousands of affected families spent months waiting for parts, replacements, or clarity. Some lost faith in the company they trusted for generations. Others became activists, pushing for stricter manufacturing oversight and faster government intervention when systemic defects arise. The recall also underscored how modern complexity magnifies risk. Engines today are more advanced, efficient, and interconnected than ever, but also more fragile. A single miscalibrated machine or contaminated batch on a supplier's line can cascade into a global crisis. And because regulatory systems remain reactive, manufacturers often detect patterns only after failures reach the public. Perhaps the most unsettling revelation came not from factories or courtrooms, but from the information battlefield. In 2025, misinformation spread faster than official data. False reports of criminal probes and inflated recall numbers dominated headlines before the truth could catch up. In an era where viral speculation can move markets, the gap between perception and reality is now one of the industry's greatest liabilities. Still, this story isn't all bleak. For affected owners, the extended warranty coverage does provide meaningful protection, and for GM, the experience has forced renewed scrutiny of its manufacturing processes. In that sense, the crisis may yet drive reform within GM and across an industry wrestling with the limits of its own complexity. In the end, the L87 recall stands as both a warning and a mirror. It shows how a microscopic flaw can ripple into a billion-dollar disaster, and how transparency, not damage control, is the only real fix for an industry built on trust. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.